Hi, I-25 movie recapped here. Today, I will recap a movie called A Perfect Murder. A Perfect Murder is a 1998 American crime thriller film about two men who take advantage of a rich girl living on her own, but she soon gets revenge. Okay, what's the continuation of the story? Batten down the hatches because we are going in hard. This is a spoiler content video. Enjoy the video and let's start the story. The movie begins with a scene of making love between a wife and her mistress. After being satisfied, the woman goes home and meets her husband. The woman is named Emily, and her husband is named Stephen. They are getting ready to attend a party. Emily doesn't seem to like her husband, because she doesn't love him. When they arrives at the party, they are greeted by important people. In the party, Emily also sees her mistress named David. Then she signals him that her husband is here. When her husband is busy talking, Emily goes to see David and going to kiss him. Suddenly, Stephen comes and surprises them. Emily, who is shocked, immediately introduces David to her husband. Emily says that David is a talented painter who had studied art at a well-known faculty. So Stephen is interested and asks for David's phone number. Maybe he is interested to buy some painting. The next day, Emily comes to visit David's house. David is enjoying her bottom cave until Emily feels satisfied. On the other hand, Stephen gets into a problem where his stock investment decreases, which make his company lose a lot. Back to Emily. When she is making love with David, suddenly, Stephen calls David. They are very shocked. It turns out that Stephen wants to meet with David. When David meets Stephen at the bar, Stephen accidentally drops a white envelope on his chair. So what's in the envelope? We don't know yet. Then David takes Stephen to his house, which looks shabby and uninhabitable. When Stephen sees David's painting, he immediately insults David's painting. David is confused about why Stephen insulted his painting. Even Stephen bluntly says that David's house was really ugly because it didn't have a seat. There is also Emily's wedding ring, which she forgot. So Stephen is even more sure about his wife's infidelity. Stephen also says that he was jealous of David's affair with his wife. David replies by saying that he loved Emily. This makes Stephen even angrier and reveals all David's secrets, where David lies that he was an art graduate at a well-known faculty. It turns out that his painting skills he got while in prison. David also cheated on a widow in San Francisco, and currently David is still a fugitive. Now Stephen offers David $500,000 on the condition that David has to kill Emily. At first, David refuses it, but he is threatened by Stephen with reporting to the police, because David does not want to go back to prison. So he accepts the offer. Stephen also tells all his plans so David can easily enter his house to kill Emily. So here the question arises: why does Stephen want to kill his wife? Then Stephen returns home and puts the white envelope, which turns out to contain a photo of David and Emily's affair. The letter is made as if it is sent by David. Damn, Stephen is really cunning. On the other hand, Emily meets her friend at a bar. She says that she didn't love Stephen, so she wants a divorce and tells her affair. Here Emily realizes that her wedding ring was left at David's house. When Emily comes home, Stephen says that he had come to David's house and made a deal with him. Emily is confused and curious about the deal. The next day, Emily immediately calls David and asks him about the deal, but David doesn't want to tell her. David instead changes the topic by taking Emily to lunch the next day. After that, David goes to Stephen's house, which looks luxurious with expensive things. Stephen explains his plan to kill Emily, from how to get in the entrance, until how to unlock the house. At first, David isn't sure that the plan would work, but Stephen convinces David by paying him $100,000 first. If David succeeds, the $400,000 will also belong to David. David is excited to see that much money. The next day, when Emily wants to keep her lunch appointment with David, suddenly, he meets Stephen on the street. Stephen also invites her to lunch. After lunch, David sees Emily with his husband, whereas David is waiting for her. David becomes jealous and destroys Emily's face painting. Suddenly, Emily calls him and says that she wanted to tell Stephen about their affair. When she comes home from work, Emily puts the key in the place as usual. Then she approaches Stephen to ask him to talk. Emily wants to be honest, but Stephen refuses on the grounds that he was going to play cards with his business friend. Emily goes into the room. Stephen takes the key that Emily had placed earlier, then keeps it under the pipe so that later David can enter the house. Stephen also says goodbye to Emily, as if his wife will die by saying goodbye. When Stephen leaves the house, a masked man enters his house. While Emily is getting ready to take a shower, then the masked man takes the key and goes straight into the house. On the other hand, Stephen is waiting for 10 o'clock. At exactly 10 o'clock, he makes an automatic call to his house. Emily, who hears the phone, keeps ringing. She goes to pick it up. Suddenly the masked man attacks her. Emily is strangled almost to death. She tries to fight but fails. Emily doesn't want to give up so easily. She takes the meat thermometer immediately, then she stabs the masked man's neck. Emily, who is shocked because she has killed someone, finally she faints. Stephen thinks that Emily is already dead, so he resumes his card game. When Stephen comes home, he is shocked to see a lot of blood and Emily is still alive. Stephen sees the body in the kitchen immediately. He uses gloves, then takes the key in the man's pocket. He puts it back into Emily's key. After that, the police come and ask Emily. Emily says that she only took calls, then someone was coming. After that, the detective asks Stephen a question, because the detective sees Stephen's footprints near the body. Stephen answers him nervously, so the detective suspects him. When the mask is opened, it turns out that it wasn't David, but someone else. Stephen is very surprised. Then Stephen hugs Emily, so the police don't suspect him. When the black bag is brought out, David looks sad because he thinks Emily is dead. Because of the trauma, Emily wants to stay at her mother's house temporarily. Stephen asks Emily to sleep, but instead of sleeping, Emily calls David, who is frustrated. David doesn't have time to pick it up, and instantly David is excited again after knowing that Emily was still alive. When he recalling her, it's Stephen who picks it up. Then David and Stephen are meeting somewhere. Stephen feels that David was playing a joke with him, because David hired someone to kill Emily, why not himself? David asks what is the next plan, but Stephen doesn't want to tell his plan. Emily, who is feeling better, comes back to her house, but it turns out that she can't enter because her house key doesn't match, so she asks the receptionist for a spare key. She also asks, does Stephen has changed her house key? The receptionist says, no. Emily comes in and sees her house. Suddenly Stephen comes, which make Emily very surprised. Then Emily says that she no longer wanted to live with Stephen. In the present, Emily lives at her friend's house. In the house, they discuss about her marriage. So Emily is a woman who is very rich. She has a wealth of $100 million, which is if Emily dies then her wealth will be inherited by her husband. But Emily's husband is also rich, so Emily doesn't suspect her husband. The next day, Emily is told that her husband is in danger of going bankrupt because of his messy stock investment. Now, Emily becomes suspicious that her husband is the one who wants to kill her. He also goes to the detective who takes care of the case. She gets the address of the masked man. Emily rushes to the masked man's apartment immediately. In the apartment, Emily is very surprised because of the key she had, can open the door of the apartment. So it turns out that the key that Stephen took that night, it was the key from the masked man. On the other hand, David meets with Stephen and asks for the remaining $400,000. Otherwise he will distribute the sound recording of Emily's assassination plot. Well, to be safe, Stephen agrees to give the remaining $400,000. When Stephen and Emily meet, she asks Stephen that why the killer's key was in my lock string. Stephen gives her a photo of her affair immediately. Stephen also lies and makes up a story for Emily. He says that David asked him for money to break his relationship with Emily. Stephen also says that David lied about himself. David is a fugitive from the police and just wants to take Emily's property. After hearing that, Emily regrets and apologizes to Stephen. Wow, Stephen is really cunning. Stephen goes to bring $400,000 to David's house, but there David only left a note and Emily's ring. The note then takes Stephen to a place. When Stephen meets David, he gives David $400,000. David runs away immediately as far as possible by train, but it turns out that Stephen was really sneaky. He already knew that David booked a ticket to Canada. So suddenly Stephen appears and kills David. And then he takes the money back. There he also finds that David had sent a voice recording his assassination plan. Stephen is very panicked and rushes home. Fortunately, Emily has not had time to check the mail. Finally Stephen takes the tape and puts it in the safe along with the $400,000. Emily realizes that Stephen was already home. Stephen feels very relieved now. When Stephen goes to the bathroom, Emily sees the bag that should have been given to David. Emily also tells Stephen that she wanted to change the house key because she couldn't find the key. Stephen is surprised by what Emily said. So Stephen takes the key in the pipe and intends to return the key again. But Stephen is caught. Emily plays Stephen's voice recording immediately. So now it is revealed that Stephen had planned to kill Emily. Emily tries to run away but Stephen blocks it. Stephen is annoyed then slams Emily. And until finally Stephen dies because he is shot by Emily. So Emily gets the gun and the tape from Stephen's safe box. And when the detective comes, Emily plays the tape then explains what happened during the fight with Stephen. The detective says, "What else can you do?" Which means Emily is not guilty of this murder. And the movie of a perfect murder ends. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it. Please give me thumbs up and click the subscribe button. See you on another video.